We're 2 weeks in, more than 2 weeks in. Mikel Arteta has come out and said, we're going to try, sign her forward. So let's go try and do that. This is the Arsenal Transfer Show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys and girls for another episode of what is the Arsenal Transfer Show. Joining you every single morning at 8 a.m. UK time. Thank you as always for joining me and making this a part of your morning routine. So I hope you've had a fantastic week. It's Friday. We've made it back to the weekend. The games just keep coming thick and fast. I'll tell you what, this new role, obviously before taking it on, was very much kind of more go to the home games, away games you do from home, kind of the weeks. You write your articles and you get your work done every day. With how hectic the schedule is, I'm starting to get that kind of like, wow, from just the perspective of someone covering it, it's non-stop. But from the perspective of players, the managers, the staff, it must be incredible. We had a game on Wednesday. I worked yesterday, wrote a few articles. Today I got a press conference. Tomorrow game. Sunday, day off. Monday, back on it. Tuesday, open training session and press conference. Wednesday, Champions League game. Thursday, chill. Friday, press conference. Game on the weekend. It's non-stop. Like it's crazy. And I enjoy the hecticness. I like being busy. It's probably the ADHD. I think I was listening to a podcast the other day that described somebody who has ADHD as when they're bored, it's like they're mourning or going through grief in some ways. And I felt that really resonated with someone that needs, when you need to be kept busy all the time. And, I think it's so far, it's keeping me busy. But good morning to those joining us in the chat box. Really appreciate your time. I hope you're doing very well indeed and staying safe. We got Black Shy, Matt G, Brendan, Paul, Stevie, Knowledge, Rich, James, Martin, Brian, Olawale, Jamil, Nick, Christopher, Paul, Arasulki and Shari. Good morning to you all. Thank you so much, as always, for tuning in. Incredibly appreciated. I have given the opportunity to the Discord server, and I've let them know a couple of days ago, just to give you a quick update for anybody that was thinking about coming along to our TGT live event. Of course, it's only for those that are and can get into London on the 20th of February. There are 2 tickets that have gone on sale. Sadly, one of our listeners had to cancel last minute, and I've left it so that people can cancel, of course, so we can try and get those tickets going. But there are already 2 tickets left. The link to the event I'll leave in today's video description. I'll just put that in there now. Actually, you might need to refresh if you want to see it a couple of times. But there's 2 tickets, obviously first come, first serve. If you want to come along on the 20th of Feb, it's in London at the Old Queen's Head. And we got some really exciting guests to come on and have a chat about Arsenal. I look forward to seeing so many of you who have already bought tickets there. But we were sold out, but we got 2 tickets available all of a sudden. So go grab them if you'd like to. Right, let's jump into today's stories, shall we? We start with a Premier League roundup of all of the action from the last couple of days, and looking at what is going on regarding. I really was hopeful last night that we might see one of the most hilarious instances that we've ever seen in the Premier League, with Manchester United losing to Southampton. However, Amad Diallo, of course, the man that really has taken this season by storm for them, has and is looking far more likely to continue this rise under Ruben Amorim. And he saved Man United once again, 82nd minute. We saw the equaliser, and then the 90th minute, and then into added time with the latest. It looked as though Southampton might be able to pull off an amazing result, but sadly it wasn't to be. Ipswich lost at home to Brighton and Hove Albion last night to complete the match week, and that, of course, follows on from the other 8 matches that we went through yesterday. Of course, Arsenal closing that gap to Liverpool to now just 4 points. And the Premier League action is set to, of course, continue this weekend. Arsenal in action. We'll talk about the Aston Villa game more so tomorrow in our preview show, but there's a lot of games, a lot of interesting clashes between teams and plenty of football still to play. Moving into more ins and outs and those that could stay. Myles Lewis-Skelly, of course, who has been an absolute sensation since breaking out this season into the Arsenal team and looking particularly at his contract situation. Suggestions are, of course, that we are looking to try and renew that deal. He only signed a professional contract last year or at the end of 2023. I think it was the end of 2023 now I think about it. But it's only around just over a year ago. And now it looks like a proper contract will indeed be looked to be negotiated, and very much looking forward to that situation and looking forward to dealing with that as well. So that's going to be a lot of fun. I can see a lot of you are reacting to a story that is breaking regarding Erling Haaland, and of course we'll talk about that in part 2. But that is quite the story indeed regarding Erling Haaland. So yeah, we'll have a look into that and we'll talk about that in part 2. But yeah, Myles Lewis-Skelly hopefully be signing a brand new contract with the club very, very soon. I don't think Arsenal will have too many issues when it comes to getting him to want to stay at the club. His love for Arsenal is very strong indeed. Now, Thomas Frank has, again, kind of set the record straight on Bryan Mbeumo. And the reason why I'm bringing up this story again today, I didn't really talk about it the other day, but I think it's worth bringing up now because for those that are kind of like, sign this player, sign that player, what about this guy? He's available, go sign him. You've got money, go sign him. This, of course, I think is a story that brings the reality of the transfer window home and gives you kind of that grounded view of teams that just do not want to let go of their players. We can all talk about the idea of signing Bryan Mbeumo, and I think he would be a really interesting addition to Arsenal if indeed he'd even want to come, because he knows that he's going to be behind Bukayo Saka in the pecking order when he returns. But Thomas Frank has categorically ruled out a January exit for Bryan Mbeumo. It could be that he leaves in the summer, and we know that Arsenal are a team that have plenty of admiration for Mbeumo. But Thomas Frank has said categorically he is not going anywhere. But there is a player that could be on his way to Arsenal or potentially a number of other clubs. And that is the very exciting youngster of Sverre Halseth Nypan, who is a Norwegian international, 18-year-old central midfielder that can play in kind of a more attacking-minded position as well. He's obviously broken through to the Norwegian under-21s setup and currently plays his trade for Rosenborg, but has really kind of garnered plenty of interest from across Europe's elite teams: Arsenal, Manchester City, Manchester United, Borussia Dortmund, Real Madrid have even been mentioned as well, to my knowledge, as having a potential interest in Nypan. But Arsenal are very much one of the sides that are considered to be keen and looking at not just Nypan in particular, but in general, looking at really strengthening the number of exciting young talents that are in not just the academy, but the youth setup and potentially with the breakthrough. Now, Nypan wants to have significant kind of, assurances, if you will, assurances over the situation where he will get game time, that he will have a pathway through to the first team, and that is going to be really important. Now, teams like Borussia Dortmund, we know, would have an advantage when it comes to making assurances like that, and that's what's really important to understand about kind of these youngsters, is that when you have teams like Ajax, you have teams like Dortmund, you have teams to a degree in the Premier League like Brighton, I suppose, as well, that can guarantee more minutes. It gives them opportunities and more advantages in these moments. But Arsenal will be looking to use their Norwegian connections, and Martin Ødegaard's is thought as to have had. I've seen these suggestions, supposedly had conversations. I can't say whether or not that's true. I have no idea, but it would make sense that Arsenal might use their Norwegian captain to try and use, to the best of his ability, an encouragement to a youngster that has got plenty of talent. So let's wait and see what happens on this front, but we'll keep you updated. And if it would be that Arsenal lands him, I've seen numbers in the round, kind of the rounds of £10 million that it could take to sign him. It would be one of the most exciting young players being snapped up by the club. Now, the latest on Benjamin Sesko, because it's Sesko, I think, is we were corrected many times before in our pronouncing Benjamin's name. Of course, his kind of name's been flitted around. The situation, to my knowledge, is this. Arsenal's interest in Benjamin Sesko has been significant and historic. And we've known that there's been interest from Arsenal in the player for like at least a year to this point. The interest, of course, was before the summer. It went into the summer. There was potential to do a deal for Arsenal in the summer. However, due to a number of factors, we know that he wanted to remain at the club for at least another year. Arsenal couldn't commit too heavily because they hadn't yet sorted out the future of Eddie Nketiah at that point. And Sesko wanted to see his future kind of sorted out, his situation before the European Championships, and then signed a new deal. That new deal removed the release clause in his contract, which was around 50 to 55 million pounds. There is no release clause, to my knowledge, in his current deal. However, what there is in his current deal is a kind of verbal understanding with RB Leipzig that if a certain team was to come in for him at a certain stage, and my understanding, I'm not sure if that counts this winter, it's more to do with next summer, that indeed a club could, if they pay the right figure, get Sesko out of RB Leipzig. Now, we are hearing from a lot of places in the last 24 hours that does not support the idea that a move to Arsenal will be happening during this winter window. Of course, Sophie on the Hybrid Squad had a fantastic interview with David Ornstein yesterday. If you have not listened to that show, I mean, forget the transfer news and that sort of things. Just listen to David talk to Sophie about the wider context of Arsenal, but also the wider context of kind of the social side of reporting, giving you a bit of an insight into what it's like being a reporter at the forefront and on the front line of the biggest deals and the biggest stories in kind of the game. He actually gets a phone call during the show, which he says is somebody calling him about a transfer. When you get to the stage where people are calling you about transfers rather than you doing all the calls, you know, that just showcases kind of how special a position David has been in and continues to be in the work that he does. It's an inspiration, certainly an idol of mine that I've had for many years, and it's brilliant to listen to him talk to Sophie. So go listen to that show. But David does confirm that his understanding is, of course, that there are currently no talks going on. Now, that's the latest understanding that he has. There's no talks specifically going on between any of the parties. We know that three parties have to come to an agreement: the club and the player, the club and the club. Have to come to these agreements before any kind of transfer is done. Now, David, not just David Ornstein, but Fabrizio Romano has been kind of giving the words of Sesko's agent, Elvis Basanovic, and he has come out and said, "I don't know from where this story comes. I never talked with Arsenal about loan of Sesko. Sesko is not a player for loans, never a topic for Arsenal or any other club." Benjamin Sesko, his agent continues by saying, "Even if we're aware of interest from several top clubs for a long time, if you ask me if Sesko will move in January, I can only say Sesko is an RB Leipzig player and they can answer these questions." So it's very important to point out that this deal isn't ruled out by the agent. The agent's effectively saying there what we have reported, what I have told you, that the interest has been there for a very, very long time, and the historic interest of the club toward the player, we know, has existed for a fair chunk of time. It's not just Arsenal, by the way. There are a number of teams that are very keen on Sesko. But the key part of this is obviously this idea of a loan. Now, you saw an ITK, I think it was yesterday morning, and I'm always telling you to be very wary when it comes to ITKs putting out stories. There is a incessant desire to be first when it comes to kind of information, for the benefit of getting clout, for the benefit of getting attention, for whatever reason. And the idea that RB Leipzig would have ever looked to loan the player was never something that was on the table from my understanding of this. And, you know, the report that we put out yesterday was kind of just a state of play. It kind of just gave you the up-to-date information of where things are, of what the situation is, that the interest in Arsenal has been there for a long, long time. And if indeed Arsenal could come to an agreement with RB Leipzig, I would be very optimistic of Sesko being open to the move to Arsenal. But those talks between the clubs, you know, that's where the question mark is at the moment in time. Kind of regarding the validity of that. But we also know that people lie. And that's one of the things that David Ornstein actually talked about in his show with Sophie, is that you will go to a source that you know is very credible. You will go to a club and they will tell you something that is not true. they will tell you something that isn't the case and isn't always accurate. So you always have to take stories with an element of a pinch of salt. Some stories you have to take with a much larger pinch of salt, because ultimately people want the media and they want you guys to know what they want you to know. Now, sometimes you can get some excellent scoops, excellent stories. But this Sesko one is obviously one that will be one of the more volatile stories as we go through toward the summer. I've said this, and I'm on record as saying that it is my prediction that if Arsenal sign a forward player, I think it would be more likely to be a versatile forward that could potentially cover in the middle. I think the out-and-out centre forward, the out-and-out number 9, is far more and continues to be far more likely to be a summer addition where Arsenal will not compromise on quality just to go and get a body to replace the injured Gabriel Jesus. We absolutely need to go and try and sign a forward. I sincerely hope that we can do that. But in regards to that, I'd be very surprised if it was Sesko that did arrive to Arsenal in this window. However, we could yet hear more on transfers from Mikel Arteta today. His press conference is early this afternoon. Looking forward to getting up to the Shelby Royalty Training Centre, of course, to hear from the Spaniard about a lot of things, not just transfers, but about the Aston Villa match tomorrow, team news. There's been some rumours about some players like Ethan Nwaneri and Ben White potentially getting some time on the training ground. So we'll hear more about that, and that's going to be very, very exciting indeed. Right, let's go to part 2, and we'll talk about that Haaland story and more right after this. Love a cup of tea in the morning. Lovely stuff. Right. Let's go. Shall we first get some of your reactions to this story that's been broken by David Ornstein, shock and horror, that Erling Haaland is expected to, or not expected, but has, here we go. Erling Haaland has signed a new 9.5-year contract to commit the vast majority of his career to Manchester City. The 24-year-old Manchester City striker now secured till 2034, and any exit clauses from previous terms have been removed, among the most lucrative deals in sporting history. Now, this is a very important story for a number of reasons, and one of the reasons why it's such an important story, as many of you have probably worked out, is that we still don't have an answer regarding the outcome to the alleged financial breaches that Manchester City are currently going through the process of determining an outcome with the relevant authorities. Now, the suggestions that a player of that importance would commit their future through, the best part of the next 10 years, to many might think that that means that he's received assurances that, Man City will be in the Champions League and Man City will be playing top level football, and that there's no chance of any punishments being received that would see them drop out of the Champions League or drop into any lower tiers. It doesn't mean, of course, that there's no clauses in that contract that could get him out of it if indeed that situation was to arise. We don't know. For those of you that are suggesting that there are rules put in place to stop players signing deals more than 5 years long, that's not true. That's not what happened. There were new rules implemented, but all those new rules was that deals could only be amortized over those 5 years, not over any more than that. So signings of players and the relevant contract lengths that they sign for can only be amortized over a 5-year period, but they can still sign contracts that are longer. This isn't a transfer anyway. This is, of course, just a contract renewal. So it's a very interesting and quite enlightening story, and certainly one of the most lucrative sporting contracts that we have ever seen take place. But what a brilliant scoop once again by David to get that deal done. To get that story done over this deal. It of course removes that release clause that was spoken about before in his contract that was already there, that could have seen clubs like Real Madrid potentially come in to take hold of the Norwegian international. Of course, Haaland's form has not been as prolific it was last season. In fact, he went through something of a goal drought as well, but obviously this is quite a significant show of faith, and who wouldn't show faith in a player like Erling Haaland? The expectation is that he will remain with the club until the latter stages of his career. He's only 24 years old, so he's got plenty of huge years at the club to come. So it makes sense. I mean, if Arsenal could sign Bukayo Saka to a 10-year contract, I think we would all agree that we would do that, wouldn't we? So it makes utter and complete sense that that City would do that. But I guess we will wait and see what happens to them. We're expecting some outcomes toward this into next season, I think, is the likelihood we'll get more of an outcome to the Manchester City scenario as well. Right. Shall we go into the chat box and tackle some of your question marks about everything that we discussed today and any more as well? Brendan says it's the most mental deal that we've ever seen. Like, what if Pep leaves? Surely he won't enjoy the same playing style forever. No, of course not. But he's willing to stay. He seems very committed to the club. He seems very attached to the club. And if you are very attached to the club, you're willing to make that commitment. It is a groundbreaking piece of footballing negotiation, that is for sure. Magambo says nothing's going to happen to City. This would turn into a geopolitical issue. You can't mess with oil supply nations. I don't think Magambo knows too much about what's going on, to be honest. Anything could yet happen, and there's no real insights into what is going to happen with this investigation. We will wait and see. No one knows at this point. Je suis Ahmed says, TGT, what do you make of Ornstein reporting that Havertz is very popular at the club? Says the club cannot just sign a striker that will cast Havertz aside with the financials involved. I'm not very surprised that that's the case. That's always going to be the case. Arsenal aren't going to just sign anybody because that would not be the right move for Arsenal to take forward. Arsenal need to sign a player that is going to be, a significant upgrade to their centre-forward option. So he's not just going to sign anybody. Havertz is a versatile figure in the squad who can play a number of different positions. And so if Arsenal were to sign a striker, it doesn't mean that Havertz suddenly jumps to the bench. It could be he can play in rotation with Ødegaard. It could be that he plays the left 8 role. So there's no guarantees that just signing a striker means that Havertz is going to be thrown to the bench. It could be that he's played a number of different positions or even instead of that centre forward, depending upon the form and the situation of both players. Tom says, hypothetically, looking 5 years into the future, what could our setup look like with the likes of Nypan, Nwaneri and Dauman? How do you feel about the balance and the playing time, or how do they fit into one team as well? These three are all kind of central midfield figures. Nwaneri more of an attacking-minded player, Dauman more of it's still exceptionally young. I almost feel uncomfortable talking about players, 15 years of age. I mean, he's a child. Let's be real about kind of that. We can't really speak too much about that scenario. We've seen before players that, like Chido Obi-Martin, for instance, we've had big feelings about what he could do in terms of his future at Arsenal and then has left. So I'm always kind of hesitant to jump on the bandwagon of hyping up very, very young players, because there's almost an uncomfortability about that. When it comes to Nypan, of course, who's 18, Nwaneri, who's just turned 17, there is obviously differences there. Nypan is a very exciting young player, and Nwaneri, we know the impact he's already had at a senior level for Arsenal. So if you can get brilliant talent, you've got to try and go and get it, in my view, especially when it's available for reasonable kind of fees as well. Let's go to Rich says Nypan plays the same position as Nwaneri and Dauman. I mean, Nwaneri and Dauman don't play the same positions, really. I know that Dauman can play slightly further forward, but they're so young. Specialization takes place at older ages. Nwaneri's already shown that he can play in those wide areas and cover those other positions. Plus, we want depth. Like, I always find it really odd when people start talking about, but we've got this player in this position, we've got these players in these positions. We have moaned about the lack of depth across this squad for so long. And now all of a sudden we start worrying about having too many players in these positions. I'm sorry, I'm never going to be on that bandwagon. I'm never going to jump on that side of worrying about having too many players in those positions. I'll certainly talk about it as a potential blockade when renewing deals or signing players, but I'm never going to complain about having too many players for certain positions. Why on earth would we do that? Baron says, is there no quality striker sitting on a bench who can give us at least 10 to 15? Do you really think a player that could score 10 to 15 league goals is sitting on a bench somewhere? In the second half of a season, when you've only got, 17 games left, a player that's going to score you 10 to 15. I really think people's expectations are wild these days. Like, genuinely, I think people's expectations are wild to think what Arsenal could do. Because not only have Arsenal potentially got to sign a player that's a forward player this window, they've got to come in, they've got to have an immediate impact and transition almost instantaneously. And then we've got people like Barron here expecting them to score 10 to 15 league goals in the second half of the season. The reality is that not many players can score 10 to 15 league goals in 17 games. Having a goal record in the league that's better than 1 in 2 typically sees your transfer fee head in the realms of triple figures sometimes. So let's kind of calm those expectations a little bit more, shall we? Like Alexander Isak is arguably considered to be, at the moment, probably the world's most in-form, elite level centre forward, and he scored 15 goals in 19 Premier League games. He is still producing a goal record that is not that's higher than 1 in 2, but it's not good. Higher than 1 in 2, but it's not as good as 1 in 1. And the idea that Arsenal can go and sign a player that's sitting on a bench somewhere that would suddenly produce a record that's just better than 1 in 2, it's mad. It's mad to me that people have these expectations and think that's the reality of the situation. It's so difficult to find these players. Owen says, "Morning, Thomas. What do you make of Gary Neville's comments on Nicholas Jover?" I thought they were disgraceful, and to be honest, I thought they were utterly, utterly disgraceful comments. Just anger for the sake of anger. Just so pointless. What a sensitive little man. Like, seriously. Why would you get annoyed at the fact that Nicholas Jover is there on a touchline doing his job? Like, it's nuts to me. It was a bit Richard Keys like to me from Neville, that, but I'm hardly surprised at the end of that. And to be honest, he's kind of fallen into this YouTube-y trap now, Gary Neville, where he's fallen into the, if I don't start being kind of all, what's the word I'm looking for? Aggravated, not provocative. If I don't start going into this provocative realm, because I used to have so much, I've talked about this before on the channel. I used to think Gary Neville was the best pundit that I'd listened to when he first kind of broke onto the scene at Sky before he took that job at Valencia. Like, I thought genuinely he was one of the most engaging listens as a pundit when he first broke onto the scene. And sadly now, and maybe it's the way that social media and media in a broader sense on the broadcasting level has gone, but he's fallen into the trap of knowing that if he doesn't entertain the listeners, if he doesn't bring in the views and clicks and the hits by saying some pretty outrageously ridiculous and stupid things, maybe he won't have a job anymore. So I think he's sadly fallen into that trap. And there's a lot of people of that ilk that, that have been very good analytically that have sadly fallen into that trap in recent times. But that's the way that media has changed at that level, I think. PTM says, "I don't want Sesko at this club. I only want one of the victors." I mean, to say so vehemently that you don't want a player of that quality and potential, again, I think is incredibly entitled and arrogant to kind of turn that down. I don't mind it saying that you've got doubts about a player or you think that you prefer somebody else, but to be like, I categorically do not want this player at Arsenal is incredibly arrogant. Hugely, hugely arrogant. Boise says, "Tom, why don't people understand the real world? Many factors, like 1, players actually wanting to join, 2, clubs wanting to sell, 3, financial fair play and PSR, and 4, other clubs wanting the same players. Of course it's hard. And there is a large portion that are very vocal, that are of a younger persuasion, that aren't as educated on, of course, what goes on in the world of transfers, that are very attached to their video games and Football Manager and EAFC and FIFA or whatever, and think that the world of transfers is very easy. Pay the money, buy the player, convince them to join. We're Arsenal, raise your standards, bring the player in, job done. It's not like that. That is the reality. So I do think that it's very important. Barron, replying to what you said about 10 to 15 goals from a player, says, "With the chances that we create, it's possible." I'm not saying it's impossible, Barron. I'm not saying it's impossible. He says, "I will lower my expectations." You should lower your expectations in that regard, because the idea that Arsenal can go out in January and sign a player that's going to bag you 10 to 15 league goals is incredibly difficult. Like, it's possible, sure. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just not feasible, but it's very tricky, especially when you said somebody sitting on a bench somewhere that can bag you 10 to 15 league goals in half a season immediately after coming in without a pre-season and coming in the winter window. That's a very unlikely thing. A very unlikely thing to happen. Manu says, "Do you still believe in Kai? I adore his technique, mentality off the ball, and the fight for the fans who aren't kind to him. How long can we justify his lack of accurate shooting, though, on his confidence?" I mean, I think it's fairly obvious that Arsenal are very keen on adding and upgrading the centre-forward position. I believe in Kai to the degree that he's shown what he is capable of. I know he can score in big games. I know he can deliver in big moments. I know he can block out the hate and the abuse of utter cretins online. I know he can do that. And he's a brilliant human being on top of that as well. And some of the charity stuff he does is great. But all of that aside, looking purely from a footballistic point of view, Arsenal need to go into the market and add that centre forward that is going to take them to the next level. It's not a hot take by any stretch of the imagination. It's just the reality. Now, it may be that we can't sign the player that's going to take us that next level now, but it might be that a player like a Sesko, for instance, you can bring in the summer and they can turn into that player. Like Mohamed Salah, I used James but Nicholas's comments from the Arscast the other day. Mohamed Salah wasn't Mohamed Salah when he arrived at Liverpool. Mohamed Salah became the Mohamed Salah that we know to be an elite, top world-class player at Liverpool. He wasn't joining as that player. He became that player. And so Arsenal have got to try and find a very similar situation. Andrew says, links to Nypan. We thought MLS might move into midfield next season, but should we go after the Norwegian plus Zubimendi? I mean, Myles Lewis-Skelly has potential, not just at left back, but in midfield, of course, as Drew points out. The signing of Nypan creates competition, which is good. But it means that Lewis-Skelly's route is not blocked because he's got that versatility. He's got that potential to maybe make left back his own. It may be that we see him do more at centre forward, but I'm very much open to see him developing in the best way for him and getting him the most minutes. And that may be at left back, it may be in midfield. We'll have to wait and see. Rakesh says, hi Tom, what is your review of our talent ID? Well, considering Rakesh that when Arteta took over with their due, of course, at the club in 2019, Arsenal was sitting in 11th place in the league. They've built a squad that has then since transformed itself into a side that's competed for the last 2 titles and is looking again to compete for a 3rd season in a row. So talent ID must be pretty good if we built a squad that's capable of doing that, mustn't it? Let's go to James says, I would love to see Arsenal move to a double pivot next season where Odegaard can be a creative 10, and we can also swap that with Kai being a Bergkamp style second striker. I think with obviously Zubimendi being a potential arrival this summer, a double pivot with Rice and Zubi could be potentially something that gets trialed, and then Odegaard becomes more of a natural number 10. But I still think that Rice will play a left 8 role to a degree. So yeah, let's see what happens there. Fuad says, I think this shows why it's important you should try to do all of your transfer business in the summer and not rely on pushing it to January when it comes too unrealistic and end up with the same squad. The problem with that is, of course, that some players that you would like to sign in the summer are not available and sometimes come up in January. And while you may want to do certain business in the summer, sometimes it's not possible. Look at Manchester City, for instance. They've sold Julian Alvarez and they look like they might end up spending close to 100 million, if not more, during this January window. That's not because they're badly run in terms of players they want to do in terms of their squad building. It's because the players certainly at that point in time may not be available and therefore they don't want to sign just anybody and they want to wait until those players are indeed gettable. Maybe they want to wait and see if Marmoush, for instance, can have another good second half of the first half of the next season before jumping on that bandwagon to try and sign him. So while it's, ideal to do all your business in the summer window, there are certainly plenty of factors outside of your control, some within your control, that might mean that you don't end up doing that. Ed says, it's funny how our fan base's attitude changes from one game to the next. Some of the fan base is worth pointing out, Ed. Certainly not everybody, but that is just the fickle nature of humanity. It's not just to do with fans of football. Things are going well, the mood is up. Things aren't going well, the mood goes down. We become a little bit more reactive, and hyperbolic, for instance. That's just society, isn't it? It's not just to do with Arsenal fans. TJR says, always regarded Neville the least worst amongst the group of children. Has some openly laughable opinions, especially when covering England and Man United. Unwarranted arrogance. Shout out, though, to Salford. Sam reckons that Lewis-Skelly could play the Xhaka role. Maybe that's somewhere we might see Lewis-Skelly in the future. Left-footed, of course, but is Moreno going to gradually grow more and adapt and improve in that position as well? Matt says, Tom, do you expect the Zubimendi deal news will go quiet? 100%. Yeah, I think that'll be much quieter unless there's any kind of breaking news of Arsenal coming to an agreement, particularly with Solskjaer before the summer. But I expect that one to kind of die down and go a bit quieter. So don't panic on that. The reports that have come out, certainly the information that's there is very legit and very optimistic indeed, and that's a positive thing. You have to go hell for leather on it. Liverpool fans know all about that, but yeah, let's wait and see what happens. But I do expect that to go a little bit quiet. Steve says, Tom, slightly left field. Do journalists concur pre-press conferences to avoid asking the same questions? Some do, yeah, and you can understand why they would. You want to be prepared. So some will have a chat with others about what they might ask so that they can be better prepared. And if somebody is asking, because there is usually something of an order to the first start of it. The broadcasters, Sky, PLP, TalkSport tend to go first. So they might converse about what they're going to speak about so they can prepare themselves and ask different types of questions so they're not going to be blindsided. However, kind of more of the beat journalists like myself and the other guys and girls might keep it to ourselves, or we might have a brief chat with somebody, but usually it's the people going first and asking kind of more the broadcast level questions. They will sometimes have conversations so that they don't cross wires and crossover. So yeah, and that makes sense, doesn't it? You would want to do that. You'd want to make sure that you're best prepared and able to ask a question that's not going to get asked again. Daz says Sesko is the striker Arsenal's interested in, and it's real, and we'll wait till the summer to bag him, in my opinion. Mira says, are clean sheets overrated? But seriously, our defending has been very questionable this season. It's just been overshadowed by attacking issues. I think it's funny because I actually think that our defending has been better than what people think it has been. We have been so good at limiting opposition to so few big opportunities that it tends to be that they need to generate a chance of such high level to actually score from or get quite lucky. And our luck has not been in this season. And the number of unfortunate goals we have conceded, is up there with anyone else. You look at the Spurs game just this past week, and a deflection from Son is the only goal that they manage to score. Manchester United score from a very rare Gabriel mistake that he should just head off the pitch, and then it's an excellent finish from Bruno Fernandes. I mean, you can say it's a good chance, of course, but the finish from Fernandes is absolutely brilliant as well. So Isak's goal against Arsenal, the luck of the ball bouncing into the box to Isak, I don't think he fouls Ødegaard at all, but the luck of kind of the touch off Murphy that's not intentional falls to Isak. He scores. And Gordon, of course, comes from David Raya making a decent save from Isak and pushing it. I say it's not really a decent save. I'd rather he pushed it more centrally. But again, that comes from a rebound. João Pedro gets a penalty against us that should never, ever, ever be a penalty. The Brentford goal, it was bad defending from Calafiori, but we give the ball away in midfield. Ødegaard gives it away, and then Brentford head through and score. You look at the other goals that we've conceded so far this season. Jean-Philippe Mateta, Jakub Kivior, I don't know what he's doing, but it's absolutely ridiculous to look at what he's doing. Raul Jimenez scores like the only real chance Fulham get in the entire game to score a goal, and it's a very, very good finish, of course. And again, Jakub Kivior arguably at fault during that game with the question mark of what we scored. Aaron Wan-Bissaka, I think, what was it? Was it a slight deflection on that one from Wan-Bissaka into the bottom corner? And Emerson scores a free kick. That's never a free kick. It's a brilliant free kick, but we all know that Declan Rice gets the ball in that challenge. So when we're conceding, it's not like we're conceding and our defending is terrible. Like, there's a lot of fortune in the goals that are being scored against us, or indeed they are very, very good goals as well. So it's nothing really in between. And I don't think our defending has been as bad as what some people have tried to make out. Martin says, João Pedro escaped another red card. Awful challenge. I don't know if you saw it yesterday between Ipswich and Brighton. João Pedro, again, disgusting challenge on the goalkeeper. Knew exactly what he was doing, trying to hurt the player. I think it's reckless. I think it's serious foul play. I think he should be sent off. Absolutely ridiculous. Victor says Arsenal should move much faster on their transfer dealings to avoid unnecessary competition. I mean, were it so easy? It's almost like people think we are slow on purpose, and we choose to try and do business as slow as feasibly possible for no other reason other to just spite ourselves. I'd love for Arsenal to do deals quickly. And the irony is, of course, we're hearing that Arsenal might do one of the best summer deals of the summer, and it's potentially already at a very advanced stage. So clearly Arsenal try and do business as quickly as they can, but there are often reasons why that can't happen. So I don't know where people get this kind of point of view from. And yes, I'd love for them to move quicker for players, but to our understanding and our knowledge, who's to say that's even possible? There are restrictions. There's factors beyond our control. There's other clubs that are also interested in players. There's clubs that do not want to talk about, potentially or even enter negotiations. They might be having talks with other clubs about other players and so are not able to have those conversations to a certain point. People think it's as easy as kind of just jumping in and putting an inquiry about a player and then it's done. Talks are there, sign the player, happy days. The reality is obviously very, very different indeed. Nick says there is a lot to be said about having the best defense in the league as well. And, this point about Arsenal defending this season, has it been as good as last season? Maybe not. Maybe not. We've conceded less goals than the team at the top of the table. In fact, we've conceded what? Have we conceded the fewest goals this season? Yes. No one has conceded fewer goals. Every other team in the league has either conceded 20 or more. We're the only team that hasn't so far this season. And we have played arguably the most difficult fixtures of the top 4, 5, 6 teams so far. The majority of teams we've played away from home are sitting in the top 10 currently in the league. Forest and Liverpool aside, we've gone to Newcastle, we've gone to Chelsea, we've gone to City, we've gone to Villa, we've gone to Bournemouth, we've gone to Brighton, we've gone to Fulham, we've gone to Brentford. We've gone to all of those places. The only teams that we've got to go to in the top 11 are Liverpool and Nottingham Forest. They're the only teams that we've got to go away to. We've still got to go to Man United in 12th. We've got to go to Palace. Sorry, no, have we got? No, we don't, do we? We host Palace. We've got to go to Man United. We've got to go. This seems mad. So Liverpool 1, Forest 2. Who else? Man United 3. Everton 4, Wolves 5, Ipswich 6, Leicester 7, Southampton 8. So the bottom 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 teams we still have to go to. We have 8 away games left. There are 17 games left to play. 9 home games remain. We can play. We've got to play Newcastle at home, Chelsea at home, and City at home. Villa this weekend at home. Bournemouth at home. Fulham, I think, still at home, and Brentford at home. So it's a really good place that we've got to be in, and we have the best defensive record in the league. And we have Ben White missing, as Grantley Poos points out, as well. And somehow we still find ourselves with the best defensive record in the league right now. So I really don't think things are too bad right now. West Ham at home as well. Yes, thank you. There's a lot still to be very optimistic about, but we've got to win our games. You can all. It doesn't matter who you've got to play. You've got to have the points on the board. We've got a very difficult game tomorrow against Aston Villa. I'm looking forward to hearing from Mikel Arteta about that game a little bit later on this morning. And with that being said, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you today. I will be back with you bright and early tomorrow morning with, of course, something of a preview ahead of the game against Aston Villa. And it's a very interesting fixture, of course. Our title hopes were ended last season against this team. There's a lot of motivation, there's a lot of narrative, but there's also a very big challenge awaiting us, and it's by no means a simple task to beat this Villa side. Even though they've not been as good this season as they have been in previous seasons, it's still a very, very difficult test, and it's a one that we absolutely have to win, especially with Liverpool going to Brentford. There could be another opportunity to take advantage of some dropped points, if indeed we are lucky. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful, and as always, up the Arsenal.